Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. On November 6, 2001, New Yorkers elected a city government, which at the time I characterized as amateurs, novices, and one-term veterans. The mayor, the public advocate, and the controller had never held public office. 4 of the 5 borough presidents were new, and 38 of the 51 city council members had never served in that body. 3 weeks later, 3 of those 38 new council members, I called them promising, joined me here to discuss their hopes and expectations for themselves and for a body whose most famous characterization was that it was, quote, less than a rubber stamp because at least a rubber stamp leaves an impression. Now, having just finished their second full year in the council, and in November having been re-elected, Council Member Gale Brewer from Manhattan 6th, Robert Jackson from Manhattan 7th, and John Liu from Queens 21st Councilmanic Districts will talk about the council, the mayor, their successes, their frustrations, and a whole lot more. Welcome back.
It's great to be back.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks, Doug.
Biggest surprise, Gale, you walked in, you had been a chief of staff for Ruth Messenger. What was your biggest surprise? Actually doing the public's business.
I think, first of all, you have to make a difference, and it's not easy to do that. So it's a combination of working with your colleagues. They were brand new, but we knew each other from the Fresh Democracy Council. We'll never forget that experience.
We'll talk about that.
And second was you have a brand new mayor. I think it was surprising how many of the mayor's commissioners I knew for the last 30 years. That's helpful. But at the same time, how do you work with your colleagues, get something done, get it through the mayor's veto or not veto, signing of the bill, and actually get a budget, legislation, and then there's always just the policy in the neighborhood. We all try to get people jobs, build affordable housing, take care of the schools. It's a process, and I think I always knew that it was a challenge. So it's very time consuming. There is light at the end of the tunnel. So I think the biggest surprise for me, very succinctly, is trying to figure out the right balance between collegial support and at the same time getting mayoral support and figuring out the positioning with the speaker, positioning in just the general body of city politics.
A lot to learn. Robert, biggest surprise?
In retrospect, the progressive legislation that this council passed, the living wage bill, the displaced workers bill, the lead paint bill, Intro 38A, the equal access bill, the no discrimination bill. I've seen people cry at a bill signing ceremony about the no discrimination bill, and to me, that was a no-brainer. No one should be discriminated against because of your race, color, creed, or sexual orientation. And people cried at the bill signing ceremony. And to hear Margarita Lopez, our colleague, who is a lesbian, and she says it publicly, that this could have never, ever, ever happened under previous council. And to me, it was a no-brainer.
So the council is not less than a rubber stamp. It's more than a rubber stamp. It's an active, involved organ of government.
There were so many people pulling at us so many different ways, and you have to stay focused on trying to do your job and doing the best that you can, knowing that you are not only representing your district, but you're representing the entire city.
John, biggest surprise?
You know, I have been so proud to serve with Gale Brewer and Robert Jackson. We have passed a slew of legislation that will make life better for New Yorkers. And I think I am surprised at the number of significant laws, landmark legislation that we've been able to pass in our first term these past 2 years in the City Council. I have to say that my biggest surprise is unfortunate and unpleasant surprise, and that is that I was just shocked as to how parochial and how much against the city of New York our governor could be. Time and time again, George Pataki, immediately after the election, kept throwing everything at us that would harm us in the city. He wouldn't give us back the commuter tax that we desperately needed and was absolutely fair for not only New York City residents, but for people who live outside New York City but work in New York City as well. You know, he beat us over the head with his Medicaid, so-called Medicaid reform that basically shifted the costs from him to the city in a time where we were doing so badly financially already. Not because of what any of us did, but because of September 11th and the downturn in the stock market and the national economy. I was the biggest shock in my tenure so far is that he could turn on a dime. The governor of such a great state like New York could turn on a dime against a city that makes up almost half its residents.
Okay. Now, a couple of days after we had our first talk in November
you expect
of
us to remember that?
well, wait a minute. We held a conference at Baruch giving training and instruction and exercises to the new council members. Coming out of that, you start your work. What would you wish you knew then that you knew now? What piece of knowledge would it have been of great benefit for Gale Brewer to know?
The issue is, John and Robert talked eloquently about the legislation that gets passed, and the issues are complicated, and you keep wishing you could think of other pieces of legislation that can make lives better, just as some of the ones that we talked, John and I, but particularly John, worked hard on a bill that helps people who don't speak English be able to access city services. Obviously, there's living wage. There are many issues that we have passed, but there are so many other challenges. Example, solid waste. That's something that Mike McMahon has worked on from Staten Island. He was very much a part of that day at Baruch College. How do we solve the solid waste problem? That's the kind of issue that every single day we're trying to grapple with. There are no easy solutions. So you come out of a conference like that sort of listing all the issues, but you don't have the solutions. Now, they do take time, but you do wish you could kind of fast track some of the processes so that people do get jobs, so that people do have, access to ability for good health care, et cetera. How do you do that on a much even faster track without the support necessarily of the governor or the president? Talking about surprises, we've only gotten $5 billion of the $20 billion that we were expected to get for the downtown area. Another example.
From the feds.
Correct. Another example. So the question is, how do you, have enough information? Obviously, you have to build your constituency to be able to fast track every last opportunity for helping people in their daily lives.
Okay. What do you wish you knew then that you know now?
Well, I knew something then, because I asked the question of then Speaker Peter Vallone. I said, what advice can you give us as a new council coming in? And he said then, and I remembered even as of today, and yesterday's lead paint bill that we passed will be a test of that. He said, it doesn't take 26 to pass legislation, meaning a majority of 51. It takes 34, meaning you have to have two-thirds in order to override a mayor's veto. And he said, and he knows from experience, that the mayor will chip away at the members to try to stop a veto from taking place. And that's going to be the test on this Intro 101A, the lead paint bill, and or if we deal with the absentee landlord tax, which the mayor vetoed, then we're going to have to deal with that when we come back.
Okay.
So I remember that very clearly, and I will remember that in the future because I know that's what it takes.
What do you wish you would have known?
I think that what I remember coming out of that, you have to know and say what you really mean, and sometimes you have to hold your tongue, because sometimes that tongue will get you behind in trouble.
Okay, John?
Let me tell you that. That's a fact. I know it.
I know you know. John?
It would have been nice if we had a crystal ball 2 years ago and understood the magnitude of the deep hole that the city was going to be in fiscally. We had to go through 2 budgets already. We're about to begin the process for the 3rd budget in the city council. And the first year, the budget was very, very difficult for any of us to swallow. The second year was that much more difficult.
Well, then you had that's the tax increase.
It's very, very difficult. I think I can speak for all of us that it's very difficult to vote for a tax increase, especially when we first went into the city council. But it was a vote to keep a balanced budget. But nonetheless, 2 years ago, if we had a crystal ball and could see how deep this hole was going to be, I think we would have been able to plan much further ahead and
Okay.
make even better decisions.
Okay, you don't have a crystal ball, but the controller recently pointed out that we've got between a $2 and a $2.5 billion budget hole for fiscal year 2004-2005. If there are no new taxes, where do you get $2.5 billion? Somebody.
Well, the mayor has also said in the paper, and he said to us when we had dinner at his house, that he's going to cut the property taxes. So it's more, perhaps. We don't know.
How do you do this?
Well, we wonder how we can cut property taxes, and all of us would like, for instance, to have 6-day, even 7-day library service, not 5-day library service, which is what we have now. And also we learned today in a budget briefing before we got here that, there's going to be a January plan, so it's a sort of interim discussion on the budget. I think what you do is you sit down with colleagues, in a similar situation to we did at Baruch in a smaller forum, and figure out how you do badger Albany and Washington. You do not let them off the hook, and you also figure out if there are any other revenue sources. What we don't do in the council is we work really hard not to cut services, and that is our number one priority.
Talk about Albany for a minute. What relief must Albany or should Albany give the city over the next fiscal year, couple of fiscal years? What?
Well, it's commuter tax.
Education.
We definitely want to make sure we have the commuter tax.
Is that politically feasible?
No, but it's worth trying. We cannot give up.
We have to push.
We have to push.
Okay.
Education.
Okay.
With the
Robert,
campaign
go ahead.
The campaign for fiscal equity, they don't have a choice. The court mandated that it must come up by July of 2004, money to give New York City to provide our children with the opportunity for sound basic education. They must come with a down payment that could mean billions of dollars for our school children.
Okay.
And in fact, the chancellor and the mayor are depending on half of the 5-year capital plan to come from Albany from the campaign for fiscal equity. The capital plan is $13 million. They're expecting $6.5 billion to come from the state of New York. That is a must.
Okay. For our viewers, you were the lead plaintiff in the campaign for fiscal equity case.
That's correct.
As you pointed out, it has to be done by July. The governor set up a task force chaired by Frank Zorb. They're going to release a report in March on. Do you see that the city's going to get a significant infusion of money, or are we going to have to put in money ourselves?
I always try to think positive, so I'm going to say absolutely yes. In fact, CFE is going to be putting forward a proposal as to what they feel a down payment is needed, and you expect that to be a large sum of money. Let me tell you, education is expensive, okay, whether it's in New York City, Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester County. But to imprison and incarcerate our youth and to prevent HIV, AIDS, and alcohol and substance abuse is even more expensive. So I ask the people, what do you rather have, to educate our people up front or to incarcerate and deal with the ills of a society that doesn't care about its children later? And I say up front.
John, Albany again.
Well,
what do we need and what do we
Well,
deserve?
I think the biggest nut will be the campaign for fiscal equity. And
Okay.
as Councilman Jackson said, they're required to do it. And we need it here in New York City for our schools. I think another big area has to be transit funds. We don't get our fair share of transit funds in the state of New York. We transport 83% of transit riders. We only get about 63% of available New York State transit funds.
So the funding formulas are skewed in transportation as they are in
as well.
education.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to, I don't think transportation is quite as skewed, and it's certainly not as important
Right.
as education
Sure.
in our public schools. But it's important also. People need a reliable way to get to and from work, school, and other endeavors. And this is a chance. If the MTA is serious about providing transportation and mass transit to New Yorkers, they should be serious about coming in and looking at what we need to take over the private bus companies and coming up with that money on the state level. This is a chance for the state to do right by the transit riders of New York
Obviously,
City.
you can talk about Medicaid,
Okay,
too.
that's what I was going to raise.
Medicaid is another $4 billion from the city of New York. For Medicaid, our 25% that we pay on every Medicaid dollar is $4 billion. And obviously that is not something that other cities have to shoulder. And so we would like to see some relief in terms of Medicaid, both from the federal and from the state government.
Can we expect it? Anything from the state, given the state's own reluctance to do it in their own budgetary
But I think
problems?
we have to do two things. One, we have to work to make sure that we have really a more democratic state senate. That is not something that we should give up on. I know Eric Schneiderman and David Patterson are working on that. And we also have to not stop. I mean, I think people who say, oh, is this possible? Why are you, are wrong. We have to continue.
Okay, let me ask a political question. Has the mayor been strong enough in his advocacy of the city's position on each of these grounds, whether it's campaign for fiscal equity or Medicaid or transportation?
I'm somebody who gets along with the mayor personally, and as I said, I've known all of his staff members for a very, very long time, and I respect them. But I don't understand the strategy of holding press conferences and, fundraisers for all of these Republicans. I do think that you need to advocate much more strongly. You can be a Republican in the city of New York and go to Albany and go to Washington and say, just as John Liu has indicated, that we are not getting, all we want is our fair share, and we're not getting it. When you only get 5 out of $20 billion for a downtown, that's not your fair share. You do hear Schumer complaining, you hear Clinton complaining, obviously Nadler, Maloney, but you don't hear a loud voice from the city. Okay. And I think that is not appropriate. I think he needs to be much louder.
Okay. Let's go ahead, Robert.
I think that the mayor has his approach, and he said that his approach is one of trying to communicate directly to our elected representatives, either in Albany or in Washington. But I do know, as an elected representative, you have to feel the pressure to make you move. And quite frankly, having people lobby you, having them email, write to you, call you up, buttonhole you in the street, that is the direct pressure that we need to have as far as the people of New York City on the governor and on Washington. And let the mayor, carry out his approach, but we need to have our approach also. And that's directly putting the pressure on our elected representatives to make them move.
Okay. And then, if I may, let's turn back to the council, a little back to history. And that was when we last talked, there was great enthusiasm about this fresh democracy council, about the changing of the rules of the council, how individual members would be empowered, how the dominance of the speaker would be mitigated. There'd be more democracy in the body. And we talked about that. In fact, I moderated a panel by potential future speakers. You got a speaker. You got some rules changes. Were you satisfied? Was your optimism warranted, or is it the same deal? County leaders, basically, did they pick the last council leader?
I think it is much more transparent. I mean, the budgets are not surprises in terms of individual council members getting favors. That's out in the open. People know what the budgets are. They aren't tampered with, to the best of my knowledge. That's a plus. That's what we voted for. We also voted if something is stopped in a committee, there's a process for getting it out. That hasn't happened, but we know it's there. But I think the most important aspect of it all, and it's the same as it was 2 years ago, is the relationship that developed as a result of those discussions. We trust each other. We have a working relationship. And I am absolutely a believer that because of that sort of pre-election discussions, some of this legislation did come about. I'm not so sure if we hadn't had that kind of fresh democracy, openness, and discussions that we would have had the great amount of legislation that you're hearing about today, or the relationships that develop in order to pass budgets. You know, those are the two meat and potatoes of the city council, and a lot of it has to do with all this, relationships that we developed before we started.
John?
Well, I think that the Fresh Democracy Council and all those discussions and late nights that we spent with each other in a good way really contributed to our being able to hit the ground running in the City Council. I think that the speaker and the system that we have among the members now lends itself to cohesion and to ultimately being able to pass legislation that in previous years was not passable. Let's be frank about it. So we were able to get that legislation done.
Any further reforms of the sort of the institutional working of the body, if you will,
as a new member, the structure in place, as Gale said, is so transparent. And then if you look back at our term, the number of Democratic caucus meetings that we had to be briefed about stuff. And Gale is the Manhattan delegation chair, and she attends all of the leadership committees, and we get briefings and documents on a continuous basis. I want to see a council that's more united and more progressive. And one of the things that I want to see, I tell you quite frankly, my staff haven't had a raise in 2 years. My budget has not been increased in 2 years. Rents and everything are going up. I want to see an increase for staff as far as at least the cost of living adjustment. No one is talking about that, but I'm going to be raising that in the new year coming up.
Voters are going to love that one.
Well, everybody else can receive a raise.
Okay.
Why can't our staff?
Having been a staff member, I understand fully. You were talking earlier, Robert, about the mayor's strategy in terms of his relationships with Albany and Washington. Speaker Miller, in a sense, has played the bad cop, if you will, or at least a more aggressive cop to Mayor Bloomberg's more good cop and more backroom, behind-the-scenes type cop. Has this strategy worked for the advantage of the city, and how effective has the speaker been as an advocate?
I just want to mention that I know that we all went at least twice to Washington and at least twice to Albany.
Yes.
First time that meant actual council members in the chambers, both houses, Washington and Albany. And I really believe that we got more money out of Albany partly because of this strategy. You know, 280 million instead of 200 million. It's not chump change.
Right.
Obviously, it could be more. And I also think that the first time that the council went to Washington made a difference meeting with our delegation. I don't know if this bad cop, good cop works. I think that that's what we have to do because the mayor is not being a bad cop at all when it comes to public appearances. He's making nice. And you do need somebody, as Robert indicated, putting the pressure on.
And is Gifford Miller doing that?
Yeah, I think he is.
I think he is too, but you know, you're saying strategy, assuming that they've agreed that that's the strategy. I mean, you may see it as a strategy.
Right.
I don't know if in fact it is.
It is a strategy. No, I mean,
But-
on the outside, it looks like it could be good cop, bad
Yeah.
cop, but they're acting independently.
But clearly,
Good point.
the approach that that this council has taken under the leadership of Gifford Miller, as far as directly lobbying, each delegation is going up to Albany, meeting with their borough delegations up in the state senate and state assembly, down in Washington, holding a state and government operations hearing down there, is a type of fresh face and the type of energy that we're putting forward to advocate for ourselves. And I've communicated directly, it's all, and sort of like threatened, you guys must bring home the bacon for New York City. And you know one thing, when they did, I told constituents time and time again, you should go up and thank your state assembly member and thank your state senator because they did well for New York City. And if they did not do it, there would have been thousands of layoffs in New York City. And I said that directly to Scott Stringer. I said, Scott, every time I see one of your constituents, I said, you should go up and thank Scott Stringer.
As the assemblyman that overlaps
because
with this.
they brought home the bacon from New York City. And when I was up there in Albany talking to Scott, it was sort of like threatening him. You guys must bring home the bacon. Well, they did.
Good.
I think it takes a combination of the advocacy and also speaking out loudly and criticizing them in public. It's got to be a combination of both.
Okay. 2004. What is the council's agenda as far as you see, and what are your individual agendas? What did you, Gale Brewer, want to accomplish as a representative of the 6th or the 7th or the 21st? And what do you want to accomplish as a member of the body?
Well, I was pleased this year because we have a new building, this AOL Time Warner Columbus Center. And working with the mayor's office and with the private sector, we managed to get 280 jobs for the neighborhood into that building. Diversity, using technology, which of course is something that
You're the chair of the
I chair
technology
the technology committee. I also am very concerned, as we all are, about affordable housing. We're going to have oversight hearings on the mayor's plan, figuring out the council put in 25 million. That is so little compared to the need. How do you preserve? We need a real preservation plan, and we need to build new housing. Those are jobs and housing are two of my priorities. Also, always figuring out, you know, the schools is ongoing thanks to Robert and all of his work and Eva Moskowitz. So I would say schools, housing, and jobs are my priorities.
Excellent. Robin.
Housing is the #1 issue that people come into my office. So affordable housing is very, very key. Obviously, education is a key component up in northern Manhattan, where the majority of the people attend public schools. And then there's some local issues within my district. Obviously, the Marine Transfer Station at 135th Street, which the plan deals with all of them. Gale Brewer has one in my district. In her district, there's one in Gifford Miller's district, and my district. So the Marine Transfer Station is a big issue, and the whole issue of Columbia expanding into Harlem, west of Broadway, north of 125th Street. Those are the major issues that are going to be coming up in '04.
Excellent. John?
Well, I think that affordable housing in public schools, those are definitely going to dominate the top of our agenda. I think in addition, there are a couple of other areas of issue. When we talk about jobs, we have to make sure that people have a way to get to and from their jobs. Mass transit, continuing to make sure that the MTA is serving all of the people of New York City is going to be critical. A part of that discussion is going to include what do we do with the private bus companies. Taxis, the taxi fares, justice for taxi cab drivers, that's going to be an issue that's coming up over the next couple of months also. There's another area that is going to be critical for New Yorkers, and that's the area of consumer protection. And I think the Department of Consumer Affairs is doing a yeoman's job of protecting New Yorkers, but they are limited in what they can do. So I think they need to be empowered more. We need a stronger set of laws that will help consumers, anything from protecting them against predators in terms of car dealers, in terms of electronics dealers, in terms of all the financial scams that continue to abound in our city. We need a very strong set of consumer protection laws, and that's going to be at the top of our agenda as well.
Do we have a fare hike on the horizon from the MTA, John? I mean, they're making noises that they don't have enough money and we're going to have another fare hike.
I think that when the MTA talks about money and their budget,
we don't believe it?
There's less than credible evidence about anything that they say nowadays. What the MTA recently has said is that there may be a fare hike 2 years from now. That is absolutely unconscionable in light of the historic fare increases that we have just experienced a few months ago. We're not even talking about a fare hike, though, because they don't, this is how sneaky and duplicitous the MTA is. That they say, we're not going to have any fare increase, but we're going to have to reduce the discounts on the Metro card. I mean, what kind of hokey-pokey nonsense is that?
Well, they're also talking about in Robert's district, and people are coming to me, anybody who uses the elevators in his district would no longer have an elevator operator, a major, major security issue, and we had to fight all of the individuals in the token booths.
That's right.
Wanting to be sure that they stay. And if you are traveling, I don't care if it's a man or women, although us women may be more concerned, in the evening, you want to be secure.
That's just another lie. They said if we have a 50-cent increase in the fare, no service reductions. They go on and close all the token booths. They're going to shut down the elevator operators and make it much more.
Inconvenience. It's not an inconvenience. It's a safety issue. In fact, it's major safety issue. I was informed this morning that someone was stabbed on the number 1 and 9 line at 181st Street in St. Nicholas Avenue. And who came to the individual's rescue? An elevator operator.
Okay. New Year's resolutions. As a council member, as an individual council member, and as a member of the body, your New Year's resolution.
I want accessibility. I've always believed that government information should be public, that the council members should be accessible, and it's...
Oh, well, you're personally, all of you, extraordinarily
We're very accessible, but I want to make sure that information, that government information is accessible as possible. That's what I've been doing for many years. It could be through, the phone book, the commissioners, the technology. That's my number one resolution, just as a resolution, as an individual.
Okay, Robert.
My resolution is to stay healthy and strong so I can continue to carry out the work that I'm doing in the 7th Councilmatic District, and also to keep my car in shape. My car is 10 years old, 251,000 miles, and I have to keep it going because I cannot afford a new one. I have a daughter going off to college.
And that may be one of the reasons why Robert Jackson walked to Albany.
That's right. That's right. And walked to City Hall. John,
that's right.
Your New Year's resolution, not to get him a car. John.
I'll help him find the good one. I am going to shake this cold that I've had for 6 weeks, and I'm going to spend more time with my wife and kid.
Very good. Admirable governmental and non-governmental goals. It was a pleasure having you all here, and we will have you back, I would say...
2 years?
No, May or June, no. We need you more frequently. We have to find out what actually happened over the past year.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you. My pleasure.